Hello, and welcome to week 6 of the Literary Lutheran Reads the Book of Concord. This week we'll be finishing up part 1 of the Large Catechism and moving on to part 2. We'll have a lot of fun. This episode is for Monday, and for those of you following along at home, we'll be reading from section 265 to 278 in the Large Catechism. Here we go. To avoid this vice, we should note that no one is allowed publicly to judge and reprove his neighbor, even though he may see him sin, unless he has a command to judge and to reprove. There is a great difference between these two things, judging sin and knowing about sin. You may indeed know about it, but you are not to judge it. Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 to 5. I can indeed see and hear that my neighbor sins, but I have no command to report it to others. Now, if I rush in, judging and passing sentence, I fall into a sin that is greater than his. But if you know about it, do nothing other than turn your ears into a grave and cover it, until you are appointed to be judge and to punish by virtue of your office. People are called slanderers who are not content with knowing the thing, but go on to assume jurisdiction. When they know about a slight offense committed by another person, they carry it into every corner. They are delighted and tickled that they can stir up another's displeasure, just as swine delight to roll themselves in the dirt and root in it with the snout. This is nothing other than meddling with God's judgment and office and pronouncing sentence and punishment with the most severe verdict. For no judge can punish to a higher degree, nor go farther than to say, that person is a thief, a murderer, a traitor, and so on. Therefore, whoever presumes to say the same things about his neighbor goes just as far as the emperor and all governments. For although you do not wield the sword, you use your poisonous tongue to shame and hurt your neighbor. Psalm 140, verse 3. God therefore would have such behavior banned, that anyone should speak evil of another person even though that person is guilty, and the latter knows it well, much less if anyone does not know it and has a story only from hearsay. But if you say, shall I not say something if it is the truth? Answer, why do you not make your accusation to regular judges? I cannot prove it publicly, and so I might be silenced and turned away in a harsh manner. Indeed, do you smell the roast? If you do not trust yourself to stand before the proper authorities and to answer well, then hold your tongue. But if you know about it, know it for yourself and not for another. For if you tell the matter to others, although it is true, you will look like a liar because you cannot prove it. Besides, you are acting like a rascal. We should never deprive anyone of his honor or good name unless it is first taken away from him publicly. False witness, then, is everything that cannot be properly proved. No one shall make public or declare for truth what is not obvious by sufficient evidence. In short, whatever is secret should be allowed to remain secret. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8. Or at any rate should be secretly rebuked, as we shall hear. Therefore, if you meet an idle tongue that betrays and slanders someone, contradict such a person promptly to his face. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 31, so he may blush. Then many a person will hold his tongue who otherwise would bring some poor man into bad repute from which he would not easily free himself. For honor and a good name are easily taken away, but not easily restored. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 1. So you see that it is directly forbidden to speak any evil of our neighbor. However, the civil government, preachers, father, and mother are not forbidden to speak out. This is based on the understanding that this commandment does not allow evil to go unpunished. Now in the 5th commandment, no one is to be injured in body, and yet Master Hans, the executioner, is excluded from this rule. By virtue of his office, he does his neighbor no good, but only evil and harm. Nevertheless, he does not sin against God's commandment. God has instituted that office on his own account. God has reserved punishment for his own good pleasure, as he threatens in the 1st commandment. In the same way, although no one has a personal right to judge and condemn anybody, yet if those who serve in offices of judgment fail to judge, they sin just as surely as a person who would act on his own accord without such an office. For in matters of justice, necessity requires one to speak of the evil, to prefer charges, to investigate, and to testify. This is no different from the case of a doctor who is sometimes compelled to examine and handle the private parts of the patient whom he is to cure. In the same way, governments, father and mother, brothers and sisters, and other good friends are under obligation to one another to rebuke evil wherever it is needful and profitable. Luke chapter 17, verse 3. The true way in this matter would be to keep the order in the gospel. In Matthew chapter 18, verse 15, Christ says, "If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Here you have a precious and excellent teaching for governing well the tongue, which is to be carefully kept against this detestable misuse. Let this then be your rule, that you do not too quickly spread evil about your neighbor and slander him to others. Instead, admonish him privately, that he may amend his life. Likewise, if someone reports to you what this or that person has done, teach him too to go and admonish that person personally. If he has seen the deed himself, but if he has not seen it, then let him hold his tongue." You can learn the same thing also from the daily government of the household. When the master of the house sees that the servant does not do what he ought, he admonishes him personally. But if he were so foolish as to let the servant sit at home and went on the streets to complain about him to his neighbors, he would no doubt be told, "You fool, how does that concern us? Why don't you tell it to the servant?" Look, that would be acting quite brotherly, so that the evil would be stopped and your neighbor would retain his honor. As Christ also says in the same place, "If he listens to you, you have gained your brother." Matthew chapter 18, verse 15. "Then you have done a great and excellent work. For do you think it is a small matter to gain a brother? Let all monks and holy orders step forth, with all their works melted together into one mass, and see if they can boast that they have gained a brother." This has been the Literary Lutheran Reads the Book of Concord. Have a blessed day.